This is the curse of Ukraine. They are always sucked into our domestic politics in one way or another.
How true.
Yeah, and they don't like it. They don't want it. They were the subject of the impeachment against President Trump. They're the subject of all the Hunter Biden stuff. They're now the they're the roadkill or the football that gets passed around when we're talking about immigration policy.
Wow. And the argument here is we can't help someone else in their security until we help ourselves.
That is the argument that the Republicans are making, and it seems to me, we've been in Washington a long time. We see this almost every year. People raise the temperature on both sides. They go down to the last minute, and then they finally just stitch it together, pass a package, and it's done, and then forget about it.
Well, so what's the argument from Volodymyr Zelensky today that maybe hasn't been heard already? Is it that Putin will win if you don't pay? And then that's what lawmakers keep hearing, but it's not moving the needle here.
No, it's not. It's not a new argument. It is a moral clarity argument that they are actually fighting for democracy, fighting for freedom, against barbarianism, against war crimes, horrific things that the Russians have done and continue to do. And I guess one of the things that he'll be saying now is what we are seeing with Hamas terrorism against Israel. It's very similar to what we saw with Russia against Ukraine, just on a larger scale.
Let's talk about what's actually happening on the ground there, by the way. We've been so focused on a debate over funding. We've heard as well that the window could be closing in terms of military opportunity. But we're going into winter. And I believe it was General Mark Kimmett who said on the program that that's actually a good thing for Ukraine, that it will slow things down, that it might actually be an opportunity if Ukraine should have a gap in funding.
Right. I think that Mark is right on that. The Ukrainians have tried to launch a substantial counteroffensive.
Yeah.
They got a little bit, but not very much. The Russian defenses have held pretty well. The Ukrainians have then turned toward longer-range, precision-guided attacks against logistics and infrastructure that are sustaining the Russian forces. If the weather then slows the Russians down in their attacks against Ukraine, they can get a little bit of a breather, and yet they keep the pressure on the Russian logistics through those precision-guided attacks. That actually could work to Ukraine's advantage and help them emerge from the winter a little bit better shape than they're in now.
If you went back 20 or 30 years, I know these questions are fun, and you went up on Capitol Hill and got all the Republicans in a room and said, hey, we've decimated half the Russian military. A little bit more money, we could actually finish this job and no Americans got involved. Would that not be sold?
That would be in a heartbeat. I mean, literally less than 5% of the annual U.S. defense budget has eliminated half of the Russian conventional military capability.
It's incredible.
The Ukrainians have done the best job of threat reduction of anyone from a U.S. perspective.
Yeah. So what does that leave Ukraine, however, still badly outnumbered?
Well, if you think about the numbers here, Russia has poured about 100 to 150 billion into their war effort against Ukraine. The U.S. and the EU, 22 times the size of the Russian economy, and we've put in about the same amount. So that's why it's stuck. If we actually leaned into this, Russia would be on its back feet.
It's an interesting argument that doesn't seem to be landing terribly well.
It's not right now. It's not. And I think one of the things, and again, I point back to the Republican members in the House, people like Speaker Johnson have indicated that they want to bring it to the floor, they want to vote in favor, but they just want to hear clear answers. What is the goal? What's the strategy for achieving the goal? And what are the resources needed to do it so that we actually do it? And instead, we get a lot of very vague statements, like, as long as it takes. Well, what's it? What are we trying to do?
Well, that's the call that we've been hearing from a number of senators here. There was a particular quote that I was looking for, and I'm not going to find it. But Speaker Johnson wants an endgame.
Yeah.
He wants to know what the strategy is that'll be different in 24 than it was in 23. Is the administration capable of answering that, or is that just the wrong question to be asking?
No, I think it's the right question, and I think what we see is the administration doesn't want to answer that because they don't want to talk about defeating Russia. Because of the risks of escalation, the risk of possible nuclear use, they don't want to get sucked into saying something that will then be used against them as saying, oh, you're getting us into World War III. So they just don't want to answer that. But I honestly believe that we do have to answer that. we can help the Ukrainians defeat the Russian forces so that the war would end that way on better terms and bring Ukraine into NATO as quickly as possible and stop the war, shut it down. I don't think that anyone really wants to see any nuclear use. I don't think the Russian military wants that. I don't think Putin wants that. But as long as he thinks that they can win, and as long as we keep signaling that we'll never bring him into NATO as long as the war's going on, that's an incentive for Putin to keep fighting.
Could Ukraine win this war in 2024?
It could. It could. I think it all depends on what happens inside Russia. They've lost over 100,000 lives fighting this war. That's an awful lot. And you think about the number of wounded. You think about the impact in Russian society. You think about the impact that sanctions have had on travel, on air travel, on Russians not able to use their credit cards when they travel abroad. I mean, this is a significant impact on the Russian society, and you just wonder how long they can sustain that.
Well, we are wondering that. And of course, lawmakers want to bet on a winner, right? They want someone to say, yeah, we'll have this thing done by July.
I would flip that around if I was talking to the lawmakers. I'd say, imagine a situation where Putin wins. Where Ukraine is defeated, the U.S. and the West appear not to have had the will and the resolve to defend Ukraine and stop Putin from taking over another country. How is that going to go over anywhere in the world? What are the Iranians going to make of that? What are the Chinese going to make of that? What are the North Koreans going to make of that? You open the door to a lot more risk if you don't help Ukraine win.